Hey everyone! Did you know there was a time when long hair wasn't just a fashion statement but a symbol of power? Today, we're talking about the Merovingian Dynasty, a family that ruled the Franks and built one of the most powerful realms in Western Europe, stretching from the late 5th century all the way to the mid-8th century. It all starts with Merovech, the semi-mythical ancestor of the dynasty. Legend has it, his lineage had some mysterious origins, with stories involving sea creatures and mythological ties. But beyond the myths, Merovech and his descendants left a very real mark on history. His grandson, Clovis I, was the game-changer. Clovis wasn't just any ruler. He united the Frankish tribes, brought most of Gaul under his control, and even stretched into parts of modern-day Germany. Imagine the scale of his ambition and the power he wielded to pull all of that together. But here's where it gets even more interesting. After Clovis passed away, his kingdom wasn't just handed down to one successor, it was divided among his 4 sons. That became a tradition in the Merovingian family. Every time a king died, his sons would split the land like slices of a pie, each ruling his own part. Sounds fair, right? Well, not really. This division often led to civil wars and disunity, making it hard for the dynasty to stay strong. Now, here's a quirky fact about these rulers. They were famously called the long-haired kings. Their hair wasn't just about style, it was a symbol of their divine right to rule. If you were a Merovingian and someone chopped your hair, you weren't fit to wear the crown anymore. Rivals were often sent off to monasteries with shaved heads, effectively removing them from the game without outright killing them. Talk about using grooming as a power move. One of the ways the Merovingians kept their hold on power was through grand ceremonies. When a new king came to power, they didn't just put a crown on his head. No, the soldiers would lift him onto a shield as a way to show that the people had given their approval for his rule. This blend of tradition and symbolism helped them hold on to the throne for centuries, even as their influence started to fade. By the 8th century, though, their grip on power was slipping. The real authority was shifting to the mayors of the palace, essentially the king's top officials, like the famous Charles Martel. His son, Pepin the Short, eventually decided he'd had enough of being the guy behind the scenes. In 751, Pepin officially ended the Merovingian reign and started a new chapter with the Carolingian Dynasty. But let's take a step back and talk about how it all began. The Merovingians weren't always kings of a massive realm. They started as part of the Salian Franks, a tribe living in what is now Belgium. Back in the 4th century, they were allied with the Romans, helping defend the empire in exchange for land. Over time, their leaders began to rise in prominence, blending Roman connections with their own growing influence. One of these early leaders was Clodio, who expanded the tribe's power in the region. After him came Merovech, the man whose name gave the dynasty its identity. Merovech is credited with leading the Franks in the Battle of the Catalonian Fields against the Huns in 451, a pivotal moment that cemented the Franks as a force to be reckoned with. When Merovech's son Childeric took over, he strengthened ties with the Romans even further. His military successes and connections laid the groundwork for his son, Clovis I, to rise to power. And boy, did Clovis make an impact. Not only did he unite the Frankish tribes and expand their territory, but he also made a bold political move. He converted to Catholicism. According to the story, this happened after a desperate prayer during a losing battle, but some historians think Clovis had deeper motives. His new religion aligned him with the Catholic majority in his new territories and brought him powerful allies, including the Byzantine Empire. Whatever his reasons, his decision helped shape the future of Christianity in Europe. By the time Clovis died in 511, he was the undisputed king of all the Franks. And after his death, his kingdom didn't stay united for long. It was split among his 4 sons, as was the custom at the time, but this move set the stage for one of the Merovingian dynasty's biggest problems: endless family infighting. The sons of Clovis initially worked together, managing to conquer Burgundy and expanding their reach into territories like Provence and Thuringia. They even forced the Saxons to pay tribute after defeating them. On paper, this sounds like a success story, but behind the scenes, things were far from peaceful. These brothers couldn't resist plotting against each other. One even tried to assassinate another, and in true dramatic fashion there were betrayals, murders, and brutal executions. By the time Clovis I, the last surviving son of Clovis, took the throne in 558 and declared himself the king of all the Franks, the kingdom had been through decades of civil war. But Clothair's reign didn't last long. He passed away in 561, and guess what happened next? Yep, the kingdom was divided again among his 4 sons. And this is where things get even messier. Sigebert I, Guntram, and Chilperic I, the most prominent of Clothair's sons, took their turns at ruling various parts of the kingdom. But the real drama started when marriages and murder entered the equation. Sigebert married Brunhilde, a Visigothic princess, while his brother Chilperic married Brunhilde's sister, Galswinthe. However, Chilperic had his wife murdered so he could marry his mistress, Fredegund. This act ignited a bitter feud between the two brothers and their queens. Civil war broke out in 572, and it didn't end well for Sigebert. He was assassinated, most likely on Fredegund's orders. Chilperic tried to seize Sigebert's territory but was blocked by their brother Guntram, who stepped in to protect Sigebert's young son, Childebert II. The rivalry between Brunhilde and Fredegund only grew fiercer over the years, becoming a driving force behind much of the chaos that followed. Even after Fredegund's death in 597, her son Clothar II carried on the feud against Brunhilde, who by then was ruling as regent for her grandsons. But Brunhilde's ambitions eventually led to her downfall. By 613, the aristocrats had had enough of her dominance and invited Clothar II to step in. He didn't just take over, he made an example of her in a gruesome execution that marked the end of her influence. Clothar II's rise reunited the fractured kingdom, but he achieved this by making some serious compromises with the aristocracy. These concessions gave regional nobles and mayors of the palace more power, slowly chipping away at the central authority of the Merovingian kings. It was a temporary peace, but the cracks in the foundation of the dynasty were becoming more visible. And then came Dagobert I, Clothar's son. He was supposed to carry on the family legacy, but even his reign couldn't escape the influence of the increasingly powerful aristocracy. When he became king of all the Franks in 629, he tried to centralize power by moving his capital to Paris. But this only angered the powerful Austrasian nobles, forcing Dagobert to divide the kingdom once more by granting his young son Sigebert III control of Austrasia. And when Dagobert I passed away in 639, the fragile balance of power he had managed to maintain began to unravel. His 2 young sons, Sigebert III and Clovis II, inherited a divided kingdom. Sigebert was given Austrasia, while Clovis ruled over the combined territories of Neustria and Burgundy. But here's the catch. Both of them were minors. This left the real power in the hands of the aristocracy, and more specifically, the mayors of the palace. These were the men who had already started accumulating authority during the reigns of Clothar II and Dagobert. Now, with underage kings on the throne, the nobles became the true rulers. By the time Sigebert III and Clovis II came of age, they found themselves little more than figureheads. The mayors of the palace had cemented their control, effectively sidelining the kings. This marked the beginning of what history remembers as the era of the Rois Fainéants, the do-nothing kings. It wasn't that these kings were lazy or uninterested. The political structure simply left them powerless, with the mayors calling the shots in everything that mattered. Despite their waning influence, the Merovingian name still held weight among the Frankish people. It symbolized continuity and legitimacy, even if the kings themselves no longer wielded real authority. This became glaringly apparent when Sigebert III died in 656. Grimoald, the ambitious mayor of the palace in Austrasia, saw an opportunity. He exiled Sigebert's son, Dagobert II, to a monastery in Ireland, had his head tonsured to signify his removal from royal life, and placed his own son, Childebert the Adopted, on the throne. But Grimoald had miscalculated. The Austrasian nobility, while increasingly independent, still clung to the idea that only a Merovingian could sit on the throne. Furious at this audacious power grab, they turned on Grimoald and his son, capturing them and sending them to Clovis II. In 657, both Grimoald and Childebert were executed. To restore order, Clovis placed his son, Childeric II, on the Austrasian throne, reaffirming the symbolic importance of the Merovingian dynasty, even as its power continued to fade. As the decades passed, the authority of the kings diminished further, while the mayors of the palace, especially the powerful Pipinid family, grew in prominence. By the early 8th century, Charles Martel, a key member of the Pipinids, emerged as a dominant figure. Officially the mayor of the Palace of Austrasia, Charles essentially ruled the Frankish kingdoms in all but name. His military successes, particularly his victory at the Battle of Tours in 732 against the Umayyad Caliphate, solidified his control. During the latter years of his life, Charles didn't even bother to install a Merovingian puppet king. For all practical purposes, the throne was empty, and Charles ruled unchallenged. When Charles Martel died in 741, his son Pepin the Short continued the family's rise. In 751, Pepin took the final step, deposing the last Merovingian king, Childeric III. With the support of the Frankish nobility and the church, Pepin declared himself king, marking the end of Merovingian rule and the beginning of the Carolingian dynasty.